Let's get to our next topic. Denver Mayor Michael Hancock delivered his State of the City address this week, revealing his plans to address affordable housing and improve mobility. He also announced the final list of projects to receive funding from the GO Bond Initiative. Denver voters will be asked this fall to approve $937 million of bond funding for projects citywide. David, State of the City address, like any other State of the Blank address, are meant for big ideas, not meant for policy discussions. What did you think of what we heard from this and the possibility of it becoming reality?
Well, I'd say starting off with something he said very early on in the State of the City was inspiring and unifying. He said, what makes Denver special? It is, quote, a city built by and for people. So this distinguishes Denver from prairie dog towns, from giant ant colonies. It is not a city for the animals, and they didn't build it. And frankly, it is a kind of subtle but unmistakable signal to the squirrels that you can stay here, but not if you cause trouble. This is a city for people, not for non-human animals. In terms of the specific policy ideas, he's bragging about this mortgage subsidy for first-time home buyers as a part of affordable housing. I think that's exactly backwards, because what we see in the federal mortgage interest deduction, which was also for the purpose of affordable housing, which is a good concept, helping people be able to buy a home, is the economic studies show that all of that economic benefit of that tax subsidy for mortgage interest gets captured by the home sellers. So it ends up just raising the prices and makes homes less affordable rather than more. And I think the same thing will happen with this subsidy. Again, the sellers will be the beneficiaries, not the buyers, in terms of the higher prices. And then there's the talk about the National Western Center. Well, in 1990, they got a whole mess of corporate welfare approved by the voters in exchange for a contract that they would be responsible for the maintenance and upkeep and continuing repair of the buildings there. They totally blew it off, and their reward for violating their contract with the city for round one of welfare is they get even more welfare. And supposedly the new welfare is going to help us with food innovation. Well, food innovation happens when people make food that other people want to buy, and that happens normally in free exchanges. You do not need Denver taxpayer subsidies going to the ranching industry in order to have food innovation.
Penn, try not to feel uncomfortable out of the glowing remarks we have from David on this speech. But as you look at the different policy ideas and proposals, some are pretty bold about looking at downtown and the need for the lessening the need for cars, and then also the list of projects on a significant list for a bond that Denver has traditionally been pretty generous with bond measures. So what you're going to put on that list has a really strong possibility of happening. What did you think of what we saw?
I thought it was a good speech. It was inspirational. It was uplifting, and as you pointed out, State of the Whatever are typically uplifting and inspirational speeches. One thing that I think is important, I believe when the mayor said that the city was built by people and for people, it's important. The distinction he's trying to make is one that I've talked about before here, and that is the focus of government ought to be taking care of people and supporting people, not worrying about stuff necessarily unless it directly relates to taking care of the citizens. The city it should be for its people, and I think the mayor is saying that. The housing efforts, we'll see what happens. I think it's the right sentiment and it's the right policy issue. I fear that the cattle may be out of the barn, or the horses may be out of the barn, and it may be too late because of all of the construction that's taking place. That does not necessarily include enough I guess you call it affordable housing or whatever at this point, so that may not be as effective. The mobility push has me a little bit concerned, only because I think the city may be a little bit ahead of RTD. Denver's not a place where our transit system is as robust as places like DC, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, even Chicago. We don't have a really good rail system, and the bus system is challenging. And so when you start limiting options in terms of using vehicles, you may be cutting off your nose to spite your face, because it's really tough to get around Denver without a vehicle.
Ben, does do significant changes, if you're going to change mobility around Denver, if you're going to make significant changes in its downtown core, does it take something like this from a mayor to set that policy forward so that others, maybe like RTD or other entities, can follow?
It does take that in theory. I don't think we're getting that today in practice. I think that when you evaluate the actual policy that they're proposing, starting with affordable housing, they're going to continue to have an impact fee, which is laughable. They're only going to do a $500,000, again, totally insignificant. The development community has basically pleaded with the administration to go for a full $1 or a $1.5 million, to drop the impact fee and to actually generate some real revenue for this issue. I think when you start to look at transportation and development and all the rest of this stuff as it grows, Penn is right. There are a ton of cranes around town. I was at a bar the other night and counted 12 just from my seat. The reality is that Denver over time has not made a decision to invest in the concomitant infrastructure to support all the growth that we've had, so we just keep packing people into these buildings and saying we'll figure out parking and we'll figure out transit. Penn also talked about a bunch of other cities and their transit. Those are all much larger markets than Denver, and I don't think they're really good comparisons. But when you look at a market like Pittsburgh or Portland that are much more closely aligned with the population of Denver, you can see that it's very possible. It's just a conscious choice. So what I'd say is that once again, this administration is hitting all the right notes in terms of what they talk about and how they try to present themselves, but there is nothing behind it. It's not a pretty state of affairs.
Patty, you've had a front row seat to see how downtown Lodo, all of it, has developed over the last 20, 30 years. Are these ideas that we're hearing from Mayor Hancock the right way to go about its future?
Well, they're certainly familiar sounding, but the most shocking thing he said was that he was frankly shocked by how much Denver has grown, how quickly it's grown, how big the boom has been. And I have to ask, where has he been for the last few years? He's been in City Hall, and before that, he was the president of the City Council. We know that we saw this growth was happening. It wasn't a surprise when the first crane came and the second crane came. And we could have had city policies instituted earlier that would have helped put a brake on some of this growth, or certainly growth without thinking about transportation, without thinking about parking, without thinking about all those problems. It was interesting that he moved his city speech from the airport, where it was last year, a big project, to a neighborhood, talking about the people who matter. But I still think those people could be very irritated come November when it comes time to vote for this bond.